Hello, New Zealand. I wish I could be right there, right now, but during these crazy times, at least we can do this. So, putting humour to work, laughter and learning, and the focus is on the clarity in the value and caution in the evaluation when applying humour within education. You can really think about it as if I can speak three separate languages. I can speak in terms of humour, in terms of education, and in terms of assessment. So first, a quick bit of background about me, how I put humour to work. Value, there's a historic view, a current view, and a conceptual view. What we currently know about the value of putting humour to work in terms of education, and the problem with translating that value, and what we can do about it. So my experience in short, I was an English teacher by day and a stand-up comedian by night, and I just couldn't shake this impression that there was some kind of connection. So I actually found a master's degree in stand-up comedy at the University of Kent. I actually wrote my dissertation on this very subject, what's the connection between stand-up comedy and teaching. And I kind of narrowed it down to communication, but it was clear there was still a lot more to learn. So how do I put humour to work? I put humour to work by providing training workshops for lecturers, science communicators and PhD students. It's really about effective communication, but what I'm actually doing practically with them is very much grounded in stand-up comedy performance. So very quickly, the connection between teaching and stand-up comedy, I got more and more focused as I studied and was providing training myself. And I realised that it's about communication, but it's actually, as Kevin McCarran points out in this slide, it's about that reliance on continuous interactive communication that makes that strong link. So I ended up doing more research in terms of how do we learn through communication, and it's important here to make a quick distinction. Oracy, which we can think of as learning to talk, public speaking, rhetoric, that kind of thing. And then there's dialogic learning, which is really learning through talk. So my specialism is in dialogic learning. While this was going on, I was still performing my own training sessions, and I would get feedback. And the feedback was positive. They would say things like, oh, it's helped me with my confidence, it's helped me to engage better with my students or to build a rapport more quickly. But although the feedback was positive, it wasn't particularly helpful. I still didn't understand any better what the value was, what was working and why. So for my sins, I took another master's degree, but this time in educational assessment. I wanted to know, how do you evaluate the idea of learning through communication? And I realised that assessment really was the way that we can build an understanding. To assess something is to try to understand it. So this is why this presentation is going to be this sort of unique mix of humour, education and assessment. It's all about value. Why putting to work historically has not been very valued or taken seriously. Through my experience of educational assessment, it really is quite distinct. Value can be understood as the perception of value and the actual value. So perception, humour studies got off to a bad start and it built a bad reputation. Superiority theory has been the dominant theory in humour studies for a very long time. Started by Aristotle and Plato. The claim was that humour's only use was as a tool to make one person, political party, ideology seem superior and another inferior. It's a game of winners and losers. Now we can very quickly debunk that with a simple example now. What if a comedian decides to use self-deprecation? If a comedian is being self-deprecating, do they lose or do they win? Are they inferior or superior? Of course, now we have lots of different theories. There's no unifying theory of humour, which I actually love. But some of the big players that I can talk about very briefly are incongruity theory, machine or object theory, and benign violation. I'm very happy to talk about those in the Q&A sessions or the online forums that are provided in more detail. I really can't stress enough how negative of an impact superiority theory has had on these kind of studies. That sloppy theorising from Aristotle and Plato has plagued, as Morial says, theoretical thought on humour for well over 20 centuries. In fact, it wasn't really until Francis Hutchinson and the 17th century that that concept of humour as a weapon, as a tool to make people superior or inferior, was really starting to be challenged properly. Value. How is it presented today? Value truly is in the eye of the beholder, and it's presented in different languages. So who's valuing it, how they're valuing it, and how they're communicating that value is extremely important context that we need to add. Now, I think if we're talking about putting humour to work and value, we've also got to bring money into the discussion, because money really is equated with value and it's the key to action. So we have to talk very briefly about stakeholders and gatekeepers, because they are the obstacle in terms of things actually taking place, for example, research. So I can certainly talk from an educational point of view that the gatekeepers and the stakeholders that really make the decisions are policymakers and funding bodies. The problem is that policymakers and funding bodies, their conception of value, the way they speak of value, is in a very different way. They need to see the numbers. They need to quantify the impact in order to make a decision on policy change or where pots of funding go. Humour put to work. Some of the highest paid practitioners in humour studies are humour consultants, but as John Morial points out, there's only a handful of humour consultants actually have an academic background in humour research. And what's more is many of the claims that they are basing their work off of don't really stand up to rigorous scientific research. The big issue with humour consultants, it can be quite tokenistic. As Morial points out, humour consulting is a business and not a branch of higher education. So with humour consultants, there's often a lack of accountability. It's very rare that they have a long-term relationship with the organisations or institutions that they're working with, and they don't come back to do follow-up studies to actually see if anything has improved because of the techniques that they've introduced. Humour consultants tend to be a one-and-done scenario. Give a presentation, do a couple of training workshops, and then collect the money and leave. And frankly, they don't do their own impact assessment or studies. It's hard to be taken seriously. Now, I need to preface this. Value is a complex subject, and assessment of value is doubly complex. What I can say in short is it's about context, context, context. So our current economic perspective of value is very much geared towards neoliberalism. In short, the market decides the value. The problem is, with that attitude of let the market decide the value, we're left with a paradox. To find the value of something, we have to assess it. But assessment is costly. So what gets assessed, what gets valued, are things that are already perceived to be valuable enough to find out what the actual value is. Bit of a mind bender, but I'm sure you've experienced this in your own life. Ticking the boxes, crunching the numbers. If you don't know this concept, you certainly know this experience. Here's where it's problem squared. So with this low perception of value in terms of humour being put to work, it actually means that it's less likely to be assessed. It's less likely to have the resources, the time and the effort that it needs to be assessed properly and therefore actually understand its value. It's that value paradox again. What we currently know about applying humour to education, Gao Hai Chen, sorry about the pronunciation, has done a fantastic piece of work here. He's taken all of the claims related to studies with humour applied to education, and he's collected them into a table. Thank you, Chen. If you're listening, I would love to be in touch. But as he points out himself, that more than half of those studies are deriving from non-empirical research. And he promotes the idea that there should be more empirical research. This again is to do with that understanding and translation of value. The gatekeepers to funding and action speak in quantities, not in qualities. But Moriol backs up those claims too, saying that humour in the classroom can aid in terms of different types of thinking, in attention and retention, helps to relieve stress and build rapport. It helps in terms of smoothing difficult interactions and promotes risk-taking. Morial's big takeaway from humour and education is that humour is particularly useful in skills-orientated classrooms. That means practical classrooms, practical forms of learning in which there's going to be lots of mistakes and false starts, so humour is a great way to smooth through that process. The other big claim is that in the 1980s there was a driving instructor school that looked at their books and realised, oh, our most successful instructors are part-time comedians. And they decided to take the leap and actually have all of their instructors be from a comedy background. These examples are training rather than pedagogy. So it's hard to say anything about learning as we might understand it. Now, of course, we have to be cautious with the use of comedy in the classroom. What was interesting in terms of research was that even participants that were predisposed to be positive about using humour in the classroom were just as cautious as those who had a negative preconception. And in short, it's about being very careful in terms of cultural differences, being sensitive and trying to avoid possible misinterpretations of humour. This is the thing about humour, that great subjectivity and how much context it needs. Humour depends upon lots of different things, but like social, cultural signifiers and symbols, things of multiple meanings and linguistic issues, and it's dependent upon an appreciation of a kind of shared social cultural norms and a lived and shared experience. It's highly, highly subjective. Humour in one context, in one place, won't be the same in another context and another place. But on the flip side of that negative point, a positive point from neuroscience. So in 2011, Professor Franklin conducted some research where he essentially put participants into an MRI machine, scanned their brains while they were watching stand-up comedy. And he backs up a lot of these things, that he says that not only do audiences engage with the comic logic, they also engage their social cultural memory. So that's digging into the past of different references and different shared experiences. But also they engage in social emotive relevance. Is this funny here, now, with these people? Is it acceptable to laugh, or is it not acceptable to laugh? Another difficulty with these studies is, as Chen points out, this kind of cause or effect, correlation, causation. So many of the studies that Chen is looking at rely upon student rating of teacher practice. Chen says here that teachers who use more humour in the classroom are more expressive, and there's a good evidence relationship between expressive teachers and higher student ratings. So the results from the studies of applying humour in the classroom may not actually be about the application of humour in the classroom. They may actually be more related to the teacher's personality and willingness to be more communicative and expressive. It may simply be the case that teachers who enjoy better teacher-student rapport or are more expressive do tend to use more humour naturally in their classroom practice. So, is it teacher personality more likely to be expressive and to use humour, or is it the application of humour that actually is impacting the student rating? It's really hard to pick apart. Now, I have to talk about this in big brushstrokes, but this is so important. Stay with me here on assessment of value. There are two major arguments in terms of assessment, and I'm going to have to do it very simply here. Please talk to me afterwards if you want to learn more. So we have two major concepts, validity and reliability. Whether something is valid, whether something is reliable. It's always a balance. Dylan Williams come up with a fantastic metaphor for this. So we can think of validity and reliability like stage lighting. So validity is like a spotlight on a single thing. You can see it in high detail, but you can't see around it. Reliability is much more like a floodlight. So it's kind of low resolution, but you can see more of the actors on the stage. The problem with these kind of studies is they're high in validity, but low in reliability. And after reading through these studies and these claims, this is the issue. They might be high in validity, so they can say, in this place at this time, humour seems to be having this effect, but they're low in reliability. So can we do this again somewhere else and get the same effect? We have studies with high validity but low reliability, which means it's not very easy to generalize between different contexts. We have a kind of cause and effect situation. We're not quite sure which way around things are going. This high validity, low reliability problem is extremely difficult in terms of funding bodies, policymakers and institutions, because reliability is really what they're looking for. So this current presentation of the value of humour in terms of education doesn't really make sense with our current economic perspective. So in short, putting humour to work, as far as industry is concerned, we don't have conclusions, we have suggestions. So what can we do about this, and what am I trying to do about this? Well, I really take to heart Chen's quote here. Future research should explore non-linear correlations between humour production in the classroom and teaching effectiveness. So that's really trying to tackle the kind of cause-effect problem that we have. So my particular focus, yes, is on humour, but as part of a process, not the product. Yes, I'm training educators through stand-up comedy techniques, but they're used as a prompt to inform communication, which can then be assessed for its value. The basic premise is to reduce what's called teacher talk, monologic presentational talk, and increase dialogue within the classroom. Less talking at, more talking with. He says, ironically, making a pre-recorded video presentation. So I've been digging really deeply in terms of how do we assess communication as a learning tool within the classroom. And what I've come up to is that right now, informally, I'm working with Cambridge on what they call CEDA codes. All this really means is Cambridge have come up with a way to codify or assess dialogue. Now, I can't go into too much detail, but I can give you a very quick example. So one of the codes of dialogue is called building upon. Does student A build upon the ideas of student B? So to not get too much into the nitty-gritty, the whole point of codifying dialogue is actually to tackle the same problem that we have in terms of humour research. So it's actually to increase the level of reliability and to rebalance it. It increases reliability because codes of dialogue have been agreed upon, which means that studies and data sets can be much broader and wider. So, a very quick final thought. We just don't know enough about the value of humour to make any real concrete claims. Humour's hard to measure, it's subjective, and it's really hard to present the value of humour to different stakeholders. Humour studies has had a bit of a bad reputation, and it's still, as I'm sure you agree, not valued anywhere nearly enough as it should be. But the problem is we're still suffering from that value paradox. Humour studies needs to already be perceived to be valuable enough to be assessed properly with empirical studies in order to then find what the actual value of humour is and then translate and communicate that to the right people. We absolutely should be talking about the big questions around the idea of putting humour to work. I absolutely agree. don't find a way to put humour to work in the current situation and the current time and the current economic perspective that we have, it's going to be really damaging in terms of funding and in the future. So that's my presentation. Contact details are in this presentation, but I'll also share them on the online forums as well. So please do get in touch if you have an interest in humour, education and assessment. My name's Martin Billingham. Thank you very much. You've been a remote audience. I can't wait to speak to you face to face soon.